Good morning and welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, Director of Professional Development for the Brown School. So happy to have you here with us today for really a unique Open Classroom. When we conceptualized this series back in March, when the physical doors of the Brown School closed to visitors, we had an idea of bringing you into the conversation, the events that happen at the school. But what we're doing today is actually distinct. It's a first, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm glad you're a part of it. And that is, you are sitting in on a Brown School class today, not metaphorically, literally today. This is Policy and Services for Children and Families, and you are a part of it, whether you're enrolled in that class, an alum of the Brown School, a prospective student, or a member of community. So we're grateful for you being here. I do want to share, this is a graduate level course on a very tough topic. When we're talking about racism and immigration laws, when we're talking about some of what's occurred with children recently in our immigration system, this may be upsetting. And so just sharing that with the audience, that the topic is not an easy one. The language that we use to describe this topic is not always, well, let's just say it's a moment that sometimes polite language is not appropriate language to describe what we're talking about. So just sharing for you that this is a mature conversation, and we're so happy that you're a part of it. And to kick us off this morning, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor Trish Cole.
Good morning. And I am very, very excited to welcome you to the Open Classroom talk on racism inherent in current immigration laws and policies. This is such a critical topic that affects so many lives. And we can't actually think about children and families today without thinking about the impact that these policies and the narrative surrounding them are having on them. I'm grateful that when I spoke with Gary Parker, who is the director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute and our Associate Dean for External Affairs, about bringing our speaker back to guest lecture in my policy class this morning, that he actually suggested we take advantage of Open Classroom and open it up to a broader audience. So there are some benefits to this virtual world. So instead of Mr. Caselli talking to 21 students, he is able to reach many more. And just before I introduce our speaker, just a couple of logistics. Put your questions in chat, and we'll leave time for a Q&A period at the end to help facilitate that process. I'll ask the questions on your behalf. So I am thrilled to introduce our speaker, Javed Caselli. He is a 2002 graduate of Washington University School of Law. His current law practice is here in St. Louis and focuses on litigation, immigration, and business advice to small and medium-sized businesses. He will be sharing some of his own story with us this morning, so I won't go into a lot of detail about his impressive career, but we'll share that he has served in senior immigration positions in both the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor. He has prosecuted terrorists, financiers, and aliens engaged in espionage and other criminal acts. And he now helps companies and would-be immigrants in their dealings with the federal government. I'll now go ahead and turn things over to Mr. Caselli, and please join me in virtually welcoming him. And you can't see everybody else's pictures, you can't there, but welcome.
Thanks, Trish. I think we should just kind of get going. So let me share my screen and we'll get the presentation running. So. All right, today we're here to talk about racism inherent in the current immigration and law policies of the United States. As Trish told you, my name is Javed Caselli, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. I was born in Iran in 1975. 2 years later, my dad got accepted to go to Michigan State University as a graduate student to get his PhD in chemistry. We moved here in 1977. He went to Michigan State. I was raised in East Lansing, and then 2 years later, the revolution happened in Iran. So when the revolution happened, we kind of decided, you know, this is probably a good place to stay because Iran was going through turmoil and I probably would not have done very well being raised under an Islamic regime. We stayed in America after that. My dad got his PhD and he was hired at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. He got his, I came over as an F1 student and we moved from Michigan State to Edwardsville. Then when I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Illinois. After a brief stop in LA, I went to WashU Law. And my time at WashU was a very interesting time to be an attorney. That's when Bush v. Gore happened. And during my last year of law school, there was a program that's still there called the DC Clinic, where they pick students to go to DC and work for congressmen and senators and government agencies. And I applied for that program during the first semester of my third year. I got accepted to that program, and within 1 or 2 days of being told I'm moving to DC, September 11th occurred. So I moved to DC to work for then Senator Gene Carnahan. While I was there, I applied for a program called the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, and I took a job first with DOJ and then with Homeland Security. When I was with Homeland Security, I was there for 10 years, and I was a part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and I used immigration law to prosecute terrorism cases and espionage cases. In 2017, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times called "I Prosecuted Terrorists for President Bush. Now my family in Iran may be banned from visiting." My mom was one of the named plaintiffs in the Supreme Court case on the Muslim ban, because in our situation, my dad at the time was dying of cancer, and we had a visa that had been approved for my aunt to come to America to see my dad and to help my mom. And even though her visa was approved, in the days it took for the Turkish embassy to stamp her visa, President Trump signed the Muslim ban. And we actually lost that case. So this title is actually wrong. It said, "I prosecuted terrorists for President Bush. Now my family in Iran is banned from visiting." That was supposed to be a 90-day ban, and it has been going on now for upwards of 3.5 years. Since we're talking about racism and immigration, we should talk about the great American immigration story. As everybody knows, Christopher Columbus came to America in 1492 and was greeted by the Native Americans, and everybody was happy, and nothing bad ever happened from this. And as you can see in the way that we depict everything, everything was hunky-dory and perfect. Later on, we had Thanksgiving, and everything was great. Nothing bad ever happened to the Native Americans. As you all know, with today being Columbus Day, or as I think both I prefer to celebrate, and I think the Brown School prefers to celebrate, we call it Indigenous Peoples Day, because from the beginning, our story about immigration in the United States has been painted over. We don't talk about the genocide of the Native Americans. We don't talk about how our largest group of immigrants that came, one of our largest group of immigrants that came to America were slaves who came here without choice. We always talk about how people chose to come to America, but we don't talk about large groups of people who never chose to come to America. When we talk about immigration, I want to put a few things into perspective for people. I think that you guys can see me. Right now, all I can see is my presentation, but I like to show people this book right here. This is the Federal Immigration Laws and Regulations. It's 2,500 pages of just laws and regulations. There's no explanations in here. There's nothing in here. There's no preface. These are just the laws and regulations. It's the second largest law in American history after the tax code. These are stats from 2016, but at that time, 46.6 million people in the United States were immigrants. About 20 million immigration forms a year were being processed. About 1 million people were becoming permanent residents. And we'll talk about what a permanent resident is. We're gonna do a little bit of basic immigration teaching later. There were about 2 million people who were eligible for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And we were seeing about an 18% growth in immigrants a year. And remember, that 46.6 million people are the actual immigrants in the United States. That doesn't count people like I was considered an immigrant because I came here, but my brother and sister who were born here were not immigrants, and my kids are not considered immigrants. So this is just the core number. I think it's pretty timely that we're talking about this because just on Saturday, the New York Times published another op-ed, and this was by their editorial board, and it talked about how Trump's overhaul of immigration is worse than you think. I keep hearing from people that say, oh, things aren't that different. And that's a pretty shocking thing for an immigration attorney to hear. Every day we wake up, the first thing we do is we go to Twitter to see if the president has come up with some new stupid racist rule to hurt our clients, because that's how things are disseminated now. And we've seen, I expected when Donald Trump became president, and remember, I was first hired by the Bush administration, I expected to see pendulum swings where you would see shifts between Bush and Obama of like one standard deviation off. What Trump has done on almost every level of immigration is so far gone from what any of us ever expected was going to happen. So here's an example. Between 2016 and 2019, annual net, and these are things that came from the editorial board of the New York Times 2 days ago. These are direct quotes from their article. Between 2016 and 2019, annual net immigration into the United States was cut by almost half, 50%. To scare people from bringing their families over the border, Jeff Sessions, who was the attorney general at the time, said, we need to take away children. It made no difference how young they were. In Barack Obama's last year as president, the ceiling for refugee admissions was 110,000. Our current number is 15,000, and that's the ceiling. But what we're really seeing is virtually zero. And we talk about how all of this has been politicized. For those of us sitting in St. Louis, something happened very recently that just really shocked me. There's this woman named Marie Kenyon, and she has been a volunteer with the Catholic Archdiocese for years. And she's been helping immigrants. She's an immigration lawyer. And she's one of these people that all of us within the community know. Marie is one of these people, you walk into her office, it's just piles and piles of cases. She's helping everybody. And she held a webinar just like this with the head of the Missouri-Kansas American Immigration Lawyers Association chapter, which I'm a part of. And the president of our group gave a speech that was non-political, but did point out the fact that our refugee numbers have plummeted. We barely see any. And he also pointed out that the refugees that we're stopping from coming to America on the southwest border are predominantly Catholic. Some people saw this presentation, complained to the Catholic Church, and Marie was suspended from her position. And people like Marie were not able to help our immigrants. Thankfully, this weekend, it looks like the Archdiocese has reversed that decision. They made an announcement that she's no longer suspended. But imagine, we've gotten to a point where a Catholic volunteer can tell the truth about, these are cold, hard numbers that are verifiable, and that has been deemed too political. The Trump administration from the beginning has been using race to divide us. As I said, I began working in 2001 in 2002, January 2002, I started working on immigration policy with the government, first for a Congresswoman, senator, and then eventually for the Department of Justice. And then when Homeland Security was founded, I moved over to Homeland Security. So I was there from the first day of Homeland Security. And one of the terms I had never heard in my life until Donald Trump ran for president was a term called chain migration. And this is from a website from an organization called FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Doesn't that sound so sweet? It just seems so innocuous. We want to reform immigration. I want to reform immigration because I know the system is broken. FAIR obviously must want to do the same thing, but it's not true. Here's a graphic that they put out. Their idea was if one person, this person at the top, comes into America, then they're quickly going to be able to bring 2 of their relatives in, and then those people are going to quickly bring 2 of their relatives, and eventually that one person is going to have hundreds of people that came from him. It's this idea, this chain migration. And the way that they talk about this, it's almost like they're replicating like bugs. And we're going to go through what really happens and what the law really provides for and show how fake this is. When you hear Donald Trump talking about things, he talks about bad hombres, and they're able to bring their aunts and uncles who are bad over to the United States. And this idea that one person can come and just spawn out like a virus is one of the ideas that they've been pushing. And there's no possibility of that in the immigration law. So ask yourself, this term, chain migration, that somebody like Javad has never heard until the president came, what's the purpose of this term? How is that being used to divide us? Well, I like to go and look at organizations like FAIR. And you'll see the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the big civil rights groups, has talked about FAIR and has talked about another organization called the Center for Immigration Studies. They call themselves CIS, which is funny because the government organization is called U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We all call it USCIS. So the Center for Immigration Studies and FAIR are both organizations that were founded by a guy named John Tanton. And John Tanton was a modern day anti-immigrant activist. And he wrote a book in this is so bizarre that somebody like John Tanton and his groups have such far-reaching power when it's so easy to learn about their racism. So as I said, CIS was deemed a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Anti-Defamation League, one of the largest groups that protects Jewish people from discrimination and from violence, put out this article about John Tanton. 1975, I mean, they're not even hiding it, guys. He wrote a book called The Case for Passive Eugenics. He basically was pushing for the same ideas that the Nazis were pushing for about getting rid of cultural groups because they weren't as worthy, except for he pushed for it to be passive. In other words, let's do this not as in your face. And he explicitly stated, we shouldn't do this to be in your face like the Nazis did, because that will have some backlash to us. He said, he cited examples of, quote, restricting childbearing to the years of maximum reproductive efficiency. He also said Hitler's reign in Nazi Germany did little to advance the discussion of eugenics among sensitive persons. That's what these organizations were founded by, this guy. So you ask yourself, you know, okay, this is some fringe organization. Donald Trump, we know, every so often retweets fringe people. You know, you can't tie this to the administration. Well, actually, you can. Who are people who were at FAIR? As you can see, these are people who have connections with FAIR. You can see our Attorney General when Donald Trump was first elected, Jeff Sessions, was involved with FAIR. The person who's pushing most of the immigration policies for the administration, who's still in the White House today, Stephen Miller, was involved with FAIR. Kellyanne Conway was involved with FAIR. And this woman on the right, who most of you will not recognize, is a woman named Julie Kirchner. Julie is the ombudsman currently for USCIS. She was the executive director for FAIR. She's the one who ran FAIR. And she's been put in a position at USCIS, what the ombudsman does is that when you have an issue with the government, they've made a bad decision. The ombudsman's office is supposed to be the advocate for citizens to go to ask the immigration authority to relook at their mistakes. Or if they've been sitting on an application for a long time that they should have granted or adjudicated, you go to the ombudsman, and they're supposed to be your friend on the inside. Our friend on the inside is somebody who is a radical anti-immigrant activist who ran an organization that was founded by a eugenics propagandist and that is associated with another organization that is a race, that is deemed a hate organization. On this next slide, we're going to talk about a few things. One of the big things that you should know about immigration is language is very important. You're going to hear people throw around the terms illegal immigrant. For those of us who are activists in this organization, we use the term undocumented alien. A lot of people have a lot of heartburn about the term alien. That's actually a legal term that we have from our statutes, but we avoid the terms illegal immigrants. But some of these terms that you're going to see are, because I've taken these from articles and from reports, and even from reports that tend to be pro-immigrant, to see how much these dehumanizing words have infiltrated our lexicon. Breitbart, which is a far-right, quote, news organization, and very pro-Trump, they have been pushing lots, and so the whole right has been pushing a lot of myths about what is happening in immigration. And the one that they really, really like to push is that, their words, illegal immigrants are more likely to commit crimes than ones who came here legally. And that's actually true. If you came here unlawfully, you are more likely to commit a crime than somebody who came here lawfully. That is true, but it's missing a major part of the equation. Here they use the term natives in this chart. This was a study done. Natives, I prefer natives to address Native Americans. Just now, mind you, this was a pro-immigrant study, and they even use words that I think are troublesome. What they mean by natives here are people born in America. So although unlawful immigrants do commit crimes at a higher rate than lawful immigrants, we find people born in the United States commit crimes at almost a 2.5 time clip to people who are here unlawfully, and they commit crimes at almost an 8 times clip to people who came to the United States legally, like me. So basically, when you guys look for who you imagine to be the perfect law-abiding citizen, you guys should think about me. And when you look at somebody who you want to believe is what a typical criminal in America looks like, that person looks like the President of the United States. So let's talk about some of these myths. Myth number 1, immigrants are taking over. Actually, that's not true. Immigrants only account for about 13% of the population. Immigrants are all from Mexico, these bad hombres coming up from the southern border. Not true. Only about 30% of our immigrants come from Asia, and currently there are more coming from China than Mexico. Immigrants don't work. Totally not true. About 3/4 of immigrants believe hard work is responsible for their success, and they make up a much higher percentage of our labor force. John Oliver did a skit back when he was, I believe he was at the Daily Show at the time. He may not have been, but yeah, I think John Oliver did it with Jon Stewart, where they went out and advertised for farm jobs. These are jobs that you always hear, immigrants are stealing our jobs, they're taking our jobs. They worked with the United Farm Workers organization to advertise these jobs. And they put this job advertisement out on the Daily Show, and they advertised it so millions and millions of people saw the jobs. And because it was out there, thousands of Americans applied for the jobs. But when they finally reached out to these Americans to see if they really wanted to come to the interviews, and then interviewed people, it was less than 10 Americans were willing to take these jobs. Immigrants are doing the work that we're not willing to do. They're also founding, and we'll talk about that later, organizations that are employing Americans. Other bit, immigrants don't help the economy. Totally not true. Immigrant-owned businesses typically have 11 employees. One of the weird things that we talk about is that often when somebody's here who's undocumented, they'll use somebody's fake social security number, and people think that that's a terrible thing, identity theft. And I agree, identity theft is bad. But what people don't talk about is that actually these people are paying into our social security system, but never going to be able to pull that money out. There are billions of dollars that are anchoring our social security system that unlawful immigrants are paying into the system, with undocumented immigrants are paying into the system that they're never going to get. And that money goes to US citizens. Other things, immigrants take American jobs, not true. Immigrants are too young or too old to work. 70% of them are in that sweet spot of age, that 25 to 64 age for workers, where it's actually less than 50% of people born in America are within that age. Immigrants take advantage of welfare. These are lawful immigrants. Actually, a higher number of lawful immigrants are employed than native-born Americans. Immigrants aren't educated. At one point, I was born in Iran. At one point, the most educated people in America were Iranian immigrants. I just gave you a bunch of super liberal hippie facts pushing back on these myths about immigrants. And people push back. Like, yeah, Javad, you can cherry pick these ideas. You can find any liberal group that's willing to bend the facts to give this to you. And I will admit, I got all of this from a very liberal organization, the George W. Bush Presidential Center. All of these things are posted on George W. Bush's website. The idea that these things aren't fact is ridiculous. When we were talking about employment, I like this side. US companies that were founded by first or second generation immigrants. Apple. People don't realize that Steve Jobs was adopted, but he was a Syrian immigrant. Alphabet, which is Google, Amazon, Facebook, Oracle, all of these companies were founded by first and second generation immigrants. Think about the millions of Americans that these companies employ. I do think, though, we do need to talk about some realities of the Obama administration. You hear people, as Trish was talking about childhood detention, and you hear these myths that Obama was the one who did that. Here's some facts. When President Obama became president, and I had worked for immigration during that administration change, there were family detention centers within the United States. These were detention centers where we kept families that were caught at the border together, mom, dad, and kids all together. And President Obama kept those open for a while, and we were detaining children. Now, we were detaining children with their parents. Eventually, President Obama closed that system and closed all of our family detention centers. And the reason he did that was because we had a program called ISAP. It's basically ankle monitoring, and it allowed families to be released after they cleared a background check on an ankle monitor. And this was a huge success. Number one, we had a 99% appearance rate for those people subsequently in immigration court. But the big side, when we talk about fiscal conservatism, is that we went from paying between $150 to up to $700 a day to private companies to detain these undocumented immigrants, or immigrants, sometimes immigrants who were here lawfully, who had broken some law, and that dropped down to $17 a day. The other thing that is absolutely true about President Obama is he had the highest deportation rate of any president ever. But there's two things that you have to understand about that. Number one, his focus was, after 9/11, we got a lot more tech savvy. So what had happened back in the olden days was you would have somebody who was here lawfully, and let's say they get arrested for rape. They do their state prison time. And at the end of it, they were handed a sheet of paper that said, hey, come back to immigration court in 6 months, and we're going to have a hearing to deport you. Not surprisingly, those people never showed up. We were able to use a lot of our technology to go after people who were the highest public safety risk. So the proportion of people who were deported were people who had been convicted of violent crimes, people who were involved in gang activities. At the same time, President Obama put forth a program called administrative closure. And that allowed people, immigration attorneys, prosecutors like me, to go into court and say, hey, Here's a case of a 70-year-old Guatemalan grandmother who's never committed any crimes, has family members here, and unfortunately the current immigration law doesn't allow her to stay. But everybody agrees that it's a net positive for her to be here. So I was allowed to close one of these cases. Even though the law didn't give her a path to citizenship at that point, we were able to close that case and allow her to go about her life with the expectation that America was going to finally reform these laws. At the end of the Bush administration, we had comprehensive immigration reform done. I worked on it at Homeland Security. It was all, everybody agreed that people who were non-criminal aliens should be allowed to stay. The only reason it died was there was a fight about whether or not these people 4, 5, 15 years down the line would be able to become citizens, because the Republicans were worried that if they became citizens, that they would vote largely for Democrats. That has now been totally scrapped. Let's do a little bit of basic immigration training. How does somebody become a citizen? There are a lot of ways, but there are 3 main ways that you see it. The first one is through family members. You'll hear stories, this is that terrible reality show, 90 Day Fiance, but you'll hear stories of people marrying somebody who's a US citizen, applying for their moms, their brothers. That's one of them. Number 2 is through your employer. This is how I became a permanent resident. My dad came here as a student, got his PhD, got an H-1B visa as a skilled worker to work for Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Because he was considered a needed worker, they applied for him to get his green card, and I got my green card through that. So typically when we talk about employment, it's for really, really high need, high skilled work, like computer programmers, engineers, doctors, models, fashion models. Yeah, there's this bizarre loophole that allows fashion models to do it, which is how our first lady came to America, because we deem in our laws that being a fashion model is more important than being a agricultural worker, and is the equivalent of, quote, it's the O visa, which we call the genius visa. And then a smaller number of our people get this through either the refugee system or the asylum system. Refugee and asylees are basically the same, in that they're people who are coming to the United States to get protection from persecution. The biggest difference is that, and we'll talk about the language later, is that refugees are processed overseas in refugee camps that are run by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, while asylees are people who are in the United States and who apply for protection after they get here. One of the biggest takeaways that I tell people from my speeches, especially when you go to your Thanksgiving table and your uncle is there who is spewing Trump propaganda and talking about how people should do this legally and do this the right ways, I tell people to remember 2 words. And those 2 words are visa bulletin. The visa bulletin. If you type visa bulletin into Google, it will take you to the Department of State's website, and there'll be 2 pages that you will see that will give you the true legal facts as to how people can become permanent residents. And remember, a permanent resident is the step before becoming a citizen. It's getting your green card. It's being processed and being told you can stay here permanently, and then within 3 to 5 years apply to become a citizen. How do you get your green card? You type in visa bulletin into Google, it takes you to the State Department page, and every month it's updated. So these are the October 2020 numbers. And we'll see, how can somebody become a green card holder? There are 3 factors that we use to determine if you can become a green card holder and how long it takes. Number 1, the person who's applying, what is their status? Are they a US citizen or a green card holder? US citizens are people who were either born here or naturalized, like I did. Green card holders are people on their path to citizenship. Obviously, it makes sense that if the person applying is a citizen, the application process takes less time. All right, so are you a citizen or a green card holder? Number 2, who are you applying for? This is when you click on the page that says visa bulletin, it actually gives you a breakdown of the only people family members are allowed to apply for. So the closer you are related to the applicant, the less time it takes. There is never a backlog for a US citizen to file for their immediate relatives. And that means immediate relative is their parents, their minor unmarried children, and their spouse. Every other group, there are a limit to the number of people who can apply. And because of that, there's a backlog. You hear Donald Trump talk about people applying for their cousins and aunts and uncles. And I wish that were true because I would make so much more money. Because this is the complete list of people who you can apply for. Unmarried sons and daughters. Sons and daughters means kids who are over 21. Unmarried sons and daughters of US citizens are F1, first priority. Spouses and children and unmarried sons and daughters of green card holders, second. Spouses and children of permanent residents. Remember, spouses and children of citizens, there's no backlog, so you can always apply for them. But spouses and children of permanent residents are one group. Unmarried sons and daughters, 21-year-old and older of permanent residents, the next group. Married sons and daughters of US citizens. And this is so technical, we treat your children who are adults differently if they're married or unmarried. And then the last group are brothers and sisters of adult US citizens. So kids who are US citizens can apply for their brothers and sisters till they're 21. Permanent residents can apply for their brothers and sisters. You don't see any cousins on here. You don't see any aunts and uncles. So the question is, how long does this take? And when you go to this page, you can actually see, there's a third criteria. So the first criteria is the applicant a US citizen or a permanent resident? The second criteria is how closely related. And the third criteria is what country you're from. Because these limitations of numbers are also broken down by country. And what we found is that there are 4 countries that have had so many applicants that they often have longer delays. And those are China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. So we're going to go back to this. You hear your uncle tell you at the Thanksgiving table, why don't these people do this legally? And we're told in America that the things that are most important to us in America are family. So we have to worry about our family. So let's see what the process would be. Let's say I am from France and I become a citizen and I have a 24-year-old daughter who lives in France and I want to bring her here from France. She's not married. So she's an unmarried son and daughter of a US citizen. And because America is so important to us to keep our families together, how long should this process take? So let's go. In the first column that we see, in the upper left corner, we see so we use the first column, all chargeability areas except those listed, that's where France is. And F1, oh my God, it takes 6 years to get that person here. That's crazy long time. But that's not really what your aunt and uncle are talking about when they talk about the people who are doing this incorrectly. What they're talking about is, from watching Fox News, the Mexicans coming across the border who are trying to bring people over. And why is it that they don't apply for their siblings and do this legally? So let's really look at what the numbers tell us. Let's say you're Mexican and you've done everything right and you become a US citizen against all odds in America. And you want to apply for your brother to come here. And your brother is 5 years old. And who wouldn't want your 5-year-old brother to come here to give him a better life? So you apply for him. So you're going to be at that bottom, that F4, fourth, a brother and adult citizen of a brother and sister of an adult US citizen. And you can apply until you're 21. How long does that take? How long should they wait for this system to work? Let's go to the fifth column, Mexico. Let's drop all the way down, F4. Currently, we are processing applications that were filed on June 22nd, 1998. That was 22 years ago. This is what I looked like 22 years ago. The idea that me as a senior in college would be smart enough and able to start a process so that my little brother's application could be looked at today is insane. Now people say, Javad, okay, we get this. You're saying all of this stuff, but in reality, everything has gotten extreme, Javad. you know, yes, we understand that Trump has pushed everything, you know, and is talking about some pretty extremist stuff. But Javad, I mean, you know what AOC's doing? You know that Bernie and Liz Warren, they don't care about borders. They want, you know, they've gone just as far left. Well, that's absolutely not true. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a video. Now, for this part of the video, you may want to turn up your volume because the volume isn't as good because it's such an old video. This is a video from 1980. This is a debate held by the League of Women Voters between then Congressman George H.W. Bush and the governor of California, Ronald Reagan. So let's listen to this. Hopefully you guys can hear it. If you can't, at the bottom of this, if you look at this later, is the link to the video so you can watch it yourself.
At all.
No sound.
Yeah,
No sound?
no sound.
There's no sound on this. Give me a second. I think I can fix that. Oh, that makes me sad. I think it might be because I'm using my Bluetooth headphones. I'm gonna take these off. We'll try this one more time. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear it now?
Ask you what you would do about Cuba.
Yes.
We told you. Now we're going to have some questions from the audience.
Yes, my name is David Grossberg, and I'd like to know, do you think the children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free, or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
Who are you addressing that to?
I think you're first in this.
He was looking right at you. I said he was. Look, I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that that problem wouldn't come up. But today, if those people are here, I would reluctantly say I think they would get whatever it is that they're, you know, what the society is giving to their neighbors. But the problem has to be solved. The problem has to be solved because as we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law. And secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole thing of 6- and 8-year-old kids being made, you know, one totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living with outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican. Add to that, I think the time has come that the United States and our neighbors, particularly our neighbor to the south, should have a better understanding and a better relationship than we've ever had. And I think that we haven't been sensitive enough to our size and our power. They have a problem of 40 to 50% unemployment. Now, this cannot continue without the possibility arising with regard to that other country that we talked about, of Cuba and what it is stirring up, of the possibility of trouble below the border, and we could have a very hostile and strange neighbor on our border. Rather than making them or talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems, make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit, and then while they're working and earning here, they pay taxes here. And when they want to go back, they can go back and they can cross and open the border both ways by understanding their problems. This is
Open
the
border both ways. Instead of opening a fence, having a fence, we should open the border both ways. This is the position of the Republican Party when they're most idealized president ever is to the left of anything anybody running for president for the Democrats currently has. Even Bernie Sanders talked about having extensive background checks, no open borders. The idea that both sides have gone to the extreme is insane to me. The right has gone so far to the extreme that they pulled the left closer to the right. We're going to fly through a few things just to give you just a little bit more background. We talk about asylum. All asylum is something that we agreed to as a part of the United Nations Convention. And that means that we are to protect people who have been persecuted for only one of 5 reasons. Not for poverty, not for criminality. It's that people who have been persecuted for their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or membership in a particular social group that we can describe. One of the other things that makes me lose my mind is hearing that as Donald Trump was ripping kids away from their parents. And remember, Obama absolutely detained some children. He did it with the whole family unit together. And if the kids were here by themselves, it was until we could process them to somebody who was safe, preferably a relative of theirs, to get them out. We weren't releasing 8-year-olds out into the street by themselves. Donald Trump's people consistently, and I hear literally the Attorney General say, the law says we have to do this. And they point to a section of law that says that we have to do this. But here's the part about it that's crazy. They're saying that the law tells them that when a baby is in their mom's hand, that they need to tear that baby out of the mom's hand and put that baby in a cage. And they point to this law, and let's look at the law. As used in this section, the term placement means the placement of an unaccompanied child. So who's an unaccompanied child? Well, first of all, anybody who's smart understands that if the mom is holding the child, then that kid is not unaccompanied. Right? So an unaccompanied child is somebody with no lawful status in the United States, has not attained 18 years of age, and with whom there's no parent or legal guardian in the United States, or no parent or legal guardian available to provide them care and custody. They're using this law to say we need to rip them away from their parents. And that's insane to me. In addition, there was a lawsuit back during the Clinton administration that runs all of this, that governs all of this, and it's called Flores v. Reno. And it says that the government, so this is what you're supposed to do when you find a child who's unaccompanied. The government is required to release children from immigration custody without unnecessary delay, and in this order. Preferences to their parents, to their other adult relatives, or to a licensed program willing to accept custody. How did the Trump administration define this? Their definition was, we are required to keep these children for as long as possible, and if we release them, we will not release them to their parents, we will not release them to their adult relatives, we will release them to programs that are not licensed and have no background in how to take care of these kids. Many of those are owned by the family of Betsy DeVos, who was our Secretary of Education. We need to put them in the least restrictive place, and we need to do this in a way that is best for them. Quickly, some of the other things that the Trump administration has done. We had a program where we gave legal advice to immigrants. It actually saved us millions of dollars a year because often people would see there's no way for them to stay. We got rid of that. We're mulling to be only one of 2 countries in the world to charge people to file for asylum. We got rid of temporary protective status for people from countries like El Salvador and Nicaragua. That's been stopped. But the one that bothers me the most is that, remember when we talked about membership in a particular social group? The way that these courts are set up is immigration courts are, the immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice, and their boss is the Attorney General. And the Attorney General can overrule any of their decisions. And in 2018, one of the grossest decisions that I've ever seen happen, the Attorney General of the United States ruled that generally claims by aliens pertaining to domestic violence or gang violence perpetrated by non-governmental actors will not qualify for asylum. So basically, there had been a particular social group that had been deemed for women who were beaten by their husbands, and not just that, because nothing is that easy, and they were able to prove to a judge that not only were they beaten by their husbands, but when they went to law enforcement in their country, their law enforcement said, we are not able to protect you. You're basically the property of your husband. So the particular social group were women who were beaten by their husbands from countries that refused to protect them because they were women. Pretty narrow. And you don't just get to say that. You have to bring in documents and all this. And Jeff Sessions says, yeah, that's not really high on our priority list of people we want to protect. And then in one of the most insane things that I've ever seen for an attorney was he just threw in gang violence. The case wasn't about gang violence. This would be like the Supreme Court of the United States having a case about abortion, about Roe versus Wade, and saying, hey, we are going to overturn Roe versus Wade. And by the way, as long as we're here, even though nobody briefed this, nobody argued this has nothing to do with this, we're going to ban all guns. It's insane. Other things. This is what an outdoor, in the upper left corner, this is what an outdoor camp for kids looks like in the desert. There are countries that we had diplomats who were coming over here and they were bringing their same-sex partners with them on visas. We got rid of that. The lower right corner is one that bothers me a lot. We stopped our program to basically nothing we had a special visa to bring over Iraqis whose lives are in danger because they helped our US servicemen. Most of them served as translators embedded with our troops. We've stopped protecting those people. And my last thing to show how totally absurd all of this is here's a quote from a deposition in a federal case. The quote is from a man named Jack H. Weil, W-E-I-L, could be Wheel, who was an immigration judge. Mind you, since then, he has been promoted to one of the top immigration judges by the Trump administration. One of the settings in immigration court is that you were not provided a public defender. That's why when the Catholic Church took Marie Kenyon off the board, and we look at the St. Louis area, from Springfield, Illinois, down to Carbondale, over to Columbia, we have about 6 pro bono immigration attorneys in the area. Some of them, my favorite group are 2 women who are Brown School graduates and law school graduates from WashU who started an organization called the MICA Project in St. Louis. They have 3 attorneys, I think, total. So when you took Marie off the board, it was bad. You're not allowed a public defender in immigration court. You have to defend yourself. And then we were shoving these kids in there. And when asked about kids in this life or death immigration proceedings and what they should do if they don't have an attorney, Judge Wheel said, I've taught immigration law literally to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience. They get it. It's not the most efficient, but it can be done. For the bad word, this is bullshit. The idea that my 5-year-old, my daughter's about to turn 5 in November, and that you could put her into a courtroom and by herself and ask her things like, can you tell me who abused you? Can you tell me who raped your mother? Can you tell me who threatened your family? And have her defend herself in court, and then for the judge to say that actually somebody 2 years younger can do this is insane to me. All of this is basically the real life system that I work in. So that's my presentation. Happy Columbus Day.
Thank you so much. And we have a few minutes. We have some great questions in here, so I'm gonna read some of those out. I do want to say that there was some conversation around in the chat around Marie Kenyon, and apparently she is a paid employee of the Archdiocese at the Catholic Legal Ministry, not a volunteer.
Right, she should be paid more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
But I will say this though, if she is a paid employee, the people who go to her for services are generally not paid, right? So it's not, so I should probably have called her a pro bono person. That's probably better, yep.
Great, great. Okay, so with the current administration stacking the deck with conservative immigration judges and personnel, how long will it take to undo the damage if the current administration is voted out of office in November?
Well, so one of the nice parts about immigration law is most of the damage has been done by executive order. The Muslim ban can be gone on day one. Matter of AB, that case about the domestic violence, can be gone on day one. And if the Democrats have a majority in the House and the Senate, the last time we've had major immigration reform was in the early 80s. That can be changed on, a bill could be passed that would fix most of this. And in reality, even when the Bush administration was there, the majority of, maybe not the majority, a good number of Republicans supported it too. But it just wasn't put forth because one person did not want to put it forward. It would have passed if it came up to a vote. So immigration is one of the places where a lot of this can be fixed by legislative action. And the courts, if written correctly, the courts won't be able to do anything about it.
Okay. You talked about people in the Trump administration who were involved with FAIR. Can you speak to how they were involved?
I mean, the main one is Julie Krishner ran FAIR. She was the executive director. She was the top one. That Steve Miller was there working with them hand in hand, writing legislation with them. Like these people that I'm talking about weren't people who showed up to a FAIR convention or gave a speech like I did. Like these people were very, very involved.
Thank you. And then any idea of the number of members of this administration that have ties to eugenics?
I don't, all I know is that if you ask anybody who's an immigration person to say, who's the number one most important person in the government when it comes to immigration, the answer is Steve Miller. And Steve Miller is absolutely tied to them. He was known, I have a friend of mine who went to undergrad with him. This guy was known for showing up at the Black Student Association and screaming at them and calling them racist because they had the word black in their name and they weren't accepting him. Well.
Okay. And there's a question here around undoing the executive order, and you've kind of touched on that. So I'm going to
Day one, it could be done.
Yeah. Okay. And then I heard that immigration courts are not part of the normal court system. They are run by the executive branch. I haven't been able to verify this. Is this true?
Correct.
Is true? Does this allow for the courts to be influenced heavily and for judges to be pressured to respond to cases in the best interest of the administration?
Yes, they are. So it used to even be worse. It used to be that the prosecutor was with Immigration and Naturalization Service, so the prosecutor was an employee of the Department of Justice. The judges are a part of an organization called the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is still within the Department of Justice. After the Homeland Security Act, the prosecutors like me, we were pulled out. We went to Homeland Security. The appeal board, which is the Board of Immigration Appeals, is within the Department of Justice. And the person who is the top of that is the Attorney General, who can take any cases like they did in AB. Now, in certain cases, not green card cases, in some cases, you can then appeal to the federal courts. But that's, tens of thousands of dollars to go down that path. Absolutely, and the judges are absolutely influenced by this stuff. We should make them just like normal judges, Article 3, independent judiciary.
Okay, thank you. And do you think the strong pendulum swing to the right of for the Democrats is to compete with Trump's policy or due to some other event?
I think just naturally, when you have people, it's like a magnet, when you have this big weight on one side pulling, your choices are you either pull to the other side or you get pulled with it. And when you see when this all started in the mid-90s, we had a centrist president in Bill Clinton. He signed the crime bill. He did welfare reform. He was not going to go farther to the left. So the average American's position on immigration is actually much closer to the left and probably closer to Reagan and Bush's position, I think.
Okay, thank you. And we are over time. There's a couple more questions, but I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So I'd like to say thank you all. Thank you, first of all, to Javad. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm gonna real quick to my class. We'll take a 5-minute break and then reconvene on our normal Zoom. And then I know Janet wanted to have some last comments.
Thanks so much, Trish. And Javad, thank you so much for sharing this information. Not always easy to hear, but super important for us to be aware and understand the work to be done. Dr. Cole, thank you for letting the rest of us crash your class and be and be guests at the Brown School this morning. To the audience, thank you so much for making time to be with us on a Monday morning. I do want to note a couple of things more coming up with Open Classroom. If you've enjoyed this and you'd like to catch up with other things we have going on, we're back on this evening at 6 p.m. for a fantastic panel discussion, 2 pandemics, 1 election, redefining equity. That conversation is going to talk about educational equity and healthcare equity. Registration is closed at this time, but we will be live on YouTube. So please join us if you're interested. And then we're back on tomorrow, 12:30, for a conversation on COVID, older adults, and long-term care. Registration is still open on the Open Classroom website, and we would love to have you back. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful week. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thanks for
Bye
having me.
now.
All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.